brand new venture of mine, I guess. This is my first YouTube video. I know you're used to catching me on the podcast, on the Ishaan S show, so this is a bit of a shift, but trust me, it's for an exciting reason. You know that we dive headfirst into politics. We love to look at every aspect of what's going on. And as we enter into an election year, I felt that there was a need for a change. I wanted to bring you a more immersive experience and something that goes beyond just audio. I wanted to pair what my commentary was with something a little more visual so that you have an idea of what's going on. Because elections are just more than just words. They're about polls, they're about maps, they're about all these things. And I know I'm nerding out right now, but really, that's what makes politics so much fun. And this is another aspect beyond the commentary that I wanted to share with you. So I am embracing YouTube. I mean, you've seen the shorts that I've already posted. Now I want to make it a little more interesting and post full-blown videos. And I don't know, we're going to see where things go with this because I really don't have anything set in stone. I just want to give this a shot and see how things go. And don't worry, the podcast is still going to come out every Friday. And even better, I mean, the podcast isn't going anywhere. And in fact, we're expanding where it goes because now I'm going to be posting the podcast here on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch the podcast, listen to what's going on while playing it on YouTube. So you can catch a lot more. And the Ishaan S show has just become even more accessible. So let's buckle up and let's move forward as we transition through with this show. I'm so excited to see what goes on with this. But for today's video, what we're going to try is make an election map of the 10 Senate seats. So CNN released a list of the 10 Senate seats they think are most likely to flip in 2024. So there are some Republican seats, but it's mostly Democrat seats that are more likely to flip. So we're going to look at what those 10 seats are and try to see whether or not what CNN has to say and explain just the idea of seat flipping and how that might play into the 2024 election and beyond that. So first, as we look at this election map, I want to get through all the seats that I don't think are going to be that contentious and are pretty easy and shoo-ins for each party. So for the Democrats, let's start with them because they're going to have a tougher time in this video. We're going to give it to Washington, California. Pretty tight states for the Democrats, in addition to New York and Maine. And all these East Coast states, these are all reliably Democrat states, in addition to, let's see if I'm missing anything. I think Virginia, too, is a reliably Democrat state. I think, obviously, some of you may know that Virginia is somewhat of a swing state, and they do have a Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, but I think the person running there, Tim Kaine, is pretty well known by voters. He is loved by many Virginia voters. He's a two-time governor. He ran for vice president with Hillary Clinton on the ticket. So he has a name, and he is pretty well approved. So I would feel safe to give the Democrats Virginia. And as for Republicans, they have not as much ground to defend. So North Dakota, that's a given. Nebraska's 2 seats. So Nebraska actually has 2 seats open this year because now former Senator Ben Sasse quit the Senate to become the chancellor of a university. I can't remember which one. I think it's in Florida. But he quit his Senate seat, and I think the governor got to appoint somebody there. So those two are pretty much shoo-ins. Missouri is also a Republican seat. Tennessee, Mississippi, in addition to Utah and Wyoming. These are and Indiana. These are all pretty reliably Republican seats. And then as for Democrats, I think I forgot a couple. Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, she ran for president. She's a pretty well-known name out here. And then New Mexico and then Hawaii. These are the what I like to call safe seats, or like the shoo-ins for each of the candidates. And now I want to talk about the seats that are in contention because that's the more interesting part. So if we look at CNN's list here, they start with number 1 being West Virginia. This is the most likely Senate seat in their view that's going to flip. And that's held by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. He is a Democrat and ruby red West Virginia. So this seat, I really think, is very much going to flip. So Joe Manchin decided that he's not going to run for re-election. He announced this not too long ago, and right now they're talking about him actually running as a third-party candidate with the No Labels Party. We're going to talk more about them on the podcast episode coming up soon, but the No Labels Party aims to be this sort of political party that wants to stray away from the Republicans and the Democrats and bring people in the center. And lately, if you've been listening to Joe Manchin and what he's been saying, he's trying to sound like he's going to be one of those like, oh, I'm all about both sides, yada, yada, yada. So that's the first seat that CNN thinks will flip. It's held by Democrat right now. The next on their list is Montana. That's held by Jon Tester. He is another Democrat. And what you may know is that Montana is a pretty Republican state, although they have a history of electing Democrats. Like just before the governor they have right now, the governor before this, their incumbent one, his name was Steve Bullock, I think. He was a Democrat, so they've had a Democrat governor and they have a Democrat senator right now. And Jon Tester has won 3 times, and he's won during more intense elections. So I'm not surprised to see that Jon Tester decided to run for a re-election because he may feel like he has that base in Montana, but it definitely is tougher in this environment that we're going into. And then Ohio, it's also held by Democrat Sherrod Brown. He has been in the Senate for a while. Pennsylvania, I'm just going to get through all the seats that CNN thinks. So Republicans in Pennsylvania. Arizona is actually held by an independent, but she used to be a Democrat. Her name is Kyrsten Sinema. She used to be a Democrat, so we're going to give her the lighter blue over there. Nevada is held by Jackie Rosen. If I'm not wrong, if we go back to CNN's list, I think it's, yes, it is Jackie Rosen. She is currently that senator for Nevada. Another Democrat, Wisconsin, is held by Tammy Baldwin. Michigan has an open seat. This is from Senator Debbie Stabenow. She is not running for re-election. And then in Texas, we have incumbent Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is someone that a lot of people know pretty well. And then Florida has Rick Scott. So this is our current Senate allocation right now. And ideally, it shouldn't be 50-50. I don't know. I think I made a mistake because one of these seats does not belong. That is weird. Anyway. Doesn't matter. What I want to talk about is these out of these 10 seats, which ones I think are most likely to flip. So I want to first talk about West Virginia. West Virginia is, again, like I was saying, a ruby red state. The governor there, Jim Justice, is currently running for this seat, and he used to be a Democrat, and then he switched to being a Republican. And I mean, if you don't call it political opportunism, I don't know what you will call, because that was pure political opportunistic activity right there, and it's seriously just that because Jim Justice is a conservative governor at the truest point. He switched after Donald Trump became president. Now that he's running for West Virginia's Senate seat, I think it's because he's term limited. But I think that's why Joe Manchin is not running for re-election. Because honestly, Jim Justice, I think, just needs to start measuring the drapes, needs to start picking his favorite colors for his office, because it seems more than likely that Jim Justice is going to take this seat. So I'm going to put this in the Republican column because I think that this is a seat that Republicans can win. And it's a serious target for Mitch McConnell. He's looking at this seat with a lot of excitement. Next seat, I think Montana. Montana, I think, could potentially stay with Jon Tester. I think it's not as much of a shoo-in. I think it's still going to be a bit of a task, and it's a lot of hard work. I'm going to label this as a toss-up. We'll round back to this one. Wisconsin, I think, is going to stay Democrat. I know, Tammy, it's in an election year, and if we were to look at the numbers right now, it's not looking good for President Biden in all the swing states. But I think as we get closer to the election, it's going to end up turning around for President Biden. I know we've talked a lot about his disapproval issues on the podcast, but I think things can turn around for him. If we were to look at 538, and if we were to look at Wisconsin's polling right now for U.S. Senate, we only do have one poll right now, and it's from the NRSC, so that's the National Republican Senatorial Committee. And it's a Republican group. It's a campaign poll. But the poll that they did take, and the last one is from May, I wouldn't put too much money on something from that far back. But Baldwin was winning by 1%. And it's not that she has this amazing record or anything. Like, she's a normal senator. Like, people know her. I just think that Wisconsin is one of those seats that Democrats can actually retain. And I think it's one of those seats that even in an election, like, I think it's because it's an election year that she might actually get a boost. So I'm going to put Wisconsin in the Democrats' column, even though the challenge, I think this is going to be one of the closest races of the election cycle, like the closest race. It's going to be really intense. Michigan, I think, is going to be firmly, I think it's going to be in the Democrats' column. I mean, if we were to find polling on the Michigan Senate race, I think a House member, I can't remember her name, but a House member is running right now for that seat. She used to work in the CIA, and she's really well known, Slotkin, Representative Slotkin. And if you look here, she is beating her opponents, all of them, by 6 points, 7 points, 9 points. Right now, lately it's become 2 points, but she has a pretty good grasp. And I don't think it's just her. I think it's just sentiments for Democrats in general. I think that Michigan is one of those states that you have Gretchen Whitmer and you have a Democrat-controlled Senate and House, and they've been working really hard lately to push through policy. They've been pushing out a lot of different policies that are really well liked by Democrats, and Gretchen Whitmer is taking full advantage of it. So the attitude for Democrats in Michigan, despite being the swing state, I think has shifted further left, and that's what makes Michigan a bit more easier of a target for Democrats. Granted, they are defending other territories, so I don't know how much they can dedicate to Michigan in terms of resources. So maybe not from the senatorial committees, but I think it's totally doable for them at a presidential level when President Biden is campaigning, because Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, these are going to be 3 states that are going to matter a lot. And if anything has taught us, if we've learned anything from these past few elections, it's that these states decide our elections. So I would expect President Biden to be in Michigan a lot. It's the mistake that haunts Hillary Clinton to this day, that she did not go to Michigan enough and she lost that state to Donald Trump. I don't think Joe Biden is making that mistake. So I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan goes to the Democrats. Then in Ohio is a bit interesting. It's held by Senator Sherrod Brown right now, and he is a well-known senator and he's done a lot of work, so people are familiar with him. I just wonder the strength of Sherrod Brown, because right now, what we see is that Ohio has been shifting further and further to the right. Like, it's become more and more Republican since Donald Trump's election. And that's a problem for Sherrod Brown, because that represents this shift away from Democrats. And the last time he ran was in 2018. And 2018 was a blue wave year. Like, it was a good year for Democrats. And it's something that I think we can expect a lot. At that time, we expected big, losses for Democrats. They just had a really lame, they had a lame election. Like, it wasn't anything interesting. It wasn't anything remarkable. But what was remarkable is that Sherrod Brown was able to retain a seat despite Trump winning the state by 8% 2 years prior. So Ohio would be what initially I would have counted it out. But because Democrats are making abortion a big issue in this campaign, like they have been for a few years now, I would see Ohio actually going to Sherrod Brown. And I only say that because of the recent election results that we had in Ohio. They had that ballot referendum for that abortion referendum on the ballot that resulted in basically Ohio voters voting to codify abortion into their state constitution. That was a big push from Democrats. And so abortion is a driving issue for Democrats, and it's a losing issue for Republicans. So I'm thinking that if Sherrod Brown and Democrats in Ohio are able to capitalize on all of that really well, then Ohio could potentially go to Democrats. And if we were to look at the polling in Ohio, we could see that Brown is winning by a comfortable margin against a lot of the people, except for maybe this one poll right here that was taken in October that was even. But other than that, for the most part, Brown is winning in a lot of the matchups, and in the latest one, he's winning by 11 points. It's abortion that's going to help Sherrod Brown win. It's going to be abortion that makes Republicans lose. But in the event that the 2024 election is not centering around that, then that becomes an issue. Then it becomes an issue for all these candidates, but most importantly in Ohio. But Ohio, we saw that happen, and I think we could realistically put that in the Democrats' column. Then next, I want to look at, I should change West Virginia. I'll make it a solid red state there. Next comes the Nevada. Nevada is really close. Nevada is one of those states that I would not be comfortable as a Democrat or Republican, honestly, if there was an incumbent in either party. And right now, Nevada's governorship is actually Republican. But if I was from either party, I would be incredibly uncomfortable about Nevada. I remember in the 2020 election how Nevada took the longest for us to get their results because they are so close and the voting there is like so intense. Like if we were to look at the analysis right now, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto did win her election last 2 years, well, I guess 2 years ago now because it's 2024, but she won her election in 2022, and it did back Biden 2 years before that. And it's the Hispanic voters in Nevada that generally drive Democrat success in this state. But lately, Donald Trump has been able to actually do a lot more in Nevada in terms of turning support, and especially among the Hispanic community on this side of the country. So it's a bit more difficult of an ask, and they did elect a Democrat or Republican governor last time. But if you were to look an NRSC poll, NRSC just means the Republican National Republican Senatorial Committee. So they are currently winning Senator Rosen against 3 Republican challengers. So that's the problem. Candidate quality is a big problem. If you do not have a good candidate running, then it's hard to actually do well in these races. And when I mean these close races, because in these close races, people pay a lot more attention. There's more media scrutiny, there's more money, and if you're not a good candidate, you cannot effectively utilize those resources. So Nevada, at this time, I would put it in the Democrats' column, but only skeptically because I have seen Nevada. I've seen how intense and how close those races get in that state. So I wouldn't be, all ready to say, huzzah, like this is all for the Democrats now. Like I feel like my mind could definitely change, and it's not like anything set in stone. In Pennsylvania, it's held by a Republican right now, but it's not like one of those MAGA Republicans that we're used to seeing a lot of the time. This seat is held by an incumbent, Bob Casey. Guys, I realized as I was doing this that Pennsylvania is actually held by a Democrat right now, so that's why we had that seat disparity. So Pennsylvania is currently a Democrat-held seat, so that's even more seats that they have to defend. But anyway, going back to our analysis here, Pennsylvania is going to be one of the more difficult races for Democrats, and for Bob Casey, it's going to be one of his hardest ones yet. But the thing is, what matters a lot is candidate quality. It's the difference between picking a Donald Trump and picking somebody a little more moderate like a Nikki Haley in a race like this, because Pennsylvania is a swing state. They have another Democrat Senator, John Fetterman, right now. They have a Democrat governor, Josh Shapiro, who won by 15%, but he won by 15% against a MAGA Trump candidate. That's the thing. He won against a MAGA Trump candidate, and so that made it really easy for Josh Shapiro. Doug Mastriano is a Republican, but a MAGA Republican, and that didn't necessarily suit well with Pennsylvania voters. So what matters right now is who the Republicans field to run in Pennsylvania against Senator Casey. Right now, Dave McCormick is right now leading this race. I feel like it might be a bit easier for Republicans in this state because Dave McCormick actually is a lot more of a moderate-esque Republican, and I say moderate because in this day and age it's not that easy to be a moderate Republican, but he is a moderate-esque Republican, and he is the type of Republican that kind of suits well with independents, and that's important because in a state like Pennsylvania where a lot of voters are very independent, it matters who you're picking. So Dave McCormick, and he ran again, but the thing is, in a Republican primary, this is an issue because he ran against Doug Mastriano for the governor primary a year and a half ago, and he lost. So can he win a Republican primary is the real question. In the event that Dave McCormick somehow wins the Republican primary, and I say somehow because it might be a bit of a challenge because him and Trump don't get along really well, then I see it being a little easier. I know this one is 15 points, but in general, Casey seems to be having a better time, but I think McCormick is going to be a tough challenger to Bob Casey. Even if the numbers right now here, like 42% to 27%, there's a lot of wiggle room and there's a lot of undecideds. That's the thing you need to see with all of these polls. I still feel that Dave McCormick is going to be a huge challenge for Bob Casey. Then in terms of these states, Texas and Florida, I'm not sure why CNN put them in their list because honestly, Texas and Florida are shoo-ins. This is going to be a home state advantage for President Trump. President Trump is going to be on that ballot in November, probably. I mean, we say probably because it's most likely that he's going to be on that ballot. And he calls Florida his home state. Ron DeSantis won in this state by 20 points. Marco Rubio won in this state. It's going to be easy for Rick Scott to win. Granted, Rick Scott is probably the weakest candidate that the Republicans could field for this race. He was the same senator that made that pledge for 5-year sunset legislation. That means that all legislation needs to be renewed every 5 years. But you know, it's still fine because Florida voters seem to back Rick Scott a lot. And in Texas, you have Ted Cruz. I wouldn't say that Texas is going blue anytime soon. I think right now we have Ted Cruz running, and Ted Cruz is unpopular in general across the country. But even when Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz, and Beto O'Rourke gave Ted Cruz a run for his money, like that race was so close. And back then, I thought in 2018 that Texas could send a Democrat to the Senate. It's possible, but really it didn't happen. And honestly, if Beto O'Rourke couldn't do it then, in that blue wave year when there was a lot more momentum behind him, I don't see why Ted Cruz is going to lose this time. So I think Ted Cruz is going to, safely win Texas. And I think Florida is going to be the same thing. Arizona. I want to talk about Arizona. So in Arizona, it's a bit more of an interesting issue because Kyrsten Sinema used to be a Democrat. Now she's an independent. And she is running against the former gubernatorial candidate, Kari Lake, who is a MAGA right-wing, darling on that side of the aisle. She lost the governor election to Katie Hobbs, the current governor, but she only lost by 1 point. Now, she's one of those election denier candidates. She denies her own loss, but she also denies the loss in the 2020 election. And then there's Ruben Gallego, Gallego, I'm not sure. He is running right now in this state as the Democrat Gallego. He is running in this state right now, and he's the Democrat trying to fill in Kyrsten Sinema's seat because Kyrsten Sinema is not a Democrat. So this is a three-way race, and that is something that is not seen all the time. And it's three equally weak candidates. Kari Lake, because Arizona is a very swingy swing state. Kari Lake is a weak candidate because she's one of those MAGA Republicans that can't really win in a state like Arizona. Karen Taylor Robson, who ran against Kari Lake in the Arizona gubernatorial primary for the Republicans, she did much better. She would have done much better. but she lost to Kari Lake. So Kari Lake is weak. Kyrsten Sinema is weak because she is unpopular with both Democrats and Republicans because no one likes her for flip-flopping so much. And then Ruben Gallego is just not well known, and that's his biggest problem. And with so much going on in Arizona, it's sucking a lot of the oxygen away from his campaign, so he doesn't have a lot to work with. So I would be rating Arizona as a toss-up too. So far what we have is Republicans at 50 and Democrats at 47. In the event that the Republicans win the White House, then Republicans would have control of the Senate, and it wouldn't matter who wins here. But if Joe Biden retains control, then the best bet for Democrats is winning 50 seats, and that would be off the back of Vice President Harris being able to break the tie-breaking votes in the Senate. So if we worked off of my opinions, I first like to go off the numbers, and the numbers, again, you have Matt Rosendale. He's a MAGA Republican. He actually was behind the effort to kick out Kevin McCarthy, if you remember that episode we covered on the podcast. So we have Matt Rosendale there. In Pennsylvania, I think it's Dave McCormick. And in Arizona, we have Kari Lake. That's the Republican pool. Then in Arizona, we also have on the Democrat side, Ruben Gallego / Kyrsten Sinema. She's left-leaning. John Tester in Montana, and Pennsylvania has Bob Casey. Ultimately, if you were to ask me, I think Montana would go to the Republicans. I think John Tester is going to be out of a job by the end of this year. And it's unfortunate for the Democrats, but I think they would also lose control of the Senate at this point. I think in Pennsylvania, it's going to be a bit more of a tough sell. I still think President Biden is capable of winning this state if he turns things around. So I would give Pennsylvania to Senator Casey, because if Biden is able to win here, generally candidates at a statewide level do better than the presidential candidates. So if Joe Biden can win here, Bob Casey can beat that margin. So I think Pennsylvania would go blue. And in Arizona, that's a bit more of the wild card, because honestly, if it was a two-way race between a Democrat and a Republican, and the Republican was Kari Lake, I would literally give it to any Democrat. But the issue is, because it's a three-way race, that suddenly makes Kari Lake's diehard 33% support a lot more contentious. So, and she's not going anywhere, Kyrsten Sinema. So it's going to become a problem for them. So if we look at the Arizona polls, it kind of just wanders around and everywhere. If you look at the Moors, you see that look, 36, 32, 32. It doesn't matter who you're running on that ticket, because it's equally difficult for everybody. Sinema seems to be doing the worst, but that's just because she's stealing votes from people. She's stealing votes from both Lake and Gallego, and that's what makes it difficult for these candidates. I still see, in general, Gallego is winning, and I think Sinema is taking more Republican voters in Arizona. These are, disaffected Republican voters who maybe aren't so tight with Trump. And I think Joe Biden has a shot at winning the state in 2024 this year. So I feel like Democrats have some hope. So at this time, I would rate Arizona as Democrat. But it's definitely, there's room for shifting around in that seat. I am not confident about Arizona, because that can shift literally with the headwinds that happen. But anyway, that is my map and what I think the Senate's going to look like as of today, January 4th. Let me know what you think of this. There's a new Ishaan S show episode tomorrow. We're going to talk about the town halls that are going to happen tonight on CNN. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. But let me know what you think of this election map. Share this video with everyone you know, and share the Ishaan S show with all your friends and family. Thank you so much for tuning in for this first video. Sorry about the Pennsylvania issue, but I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.